Welcome to Ex Machina. In today's special episode, we profile the changing fortunes of Sega, one of the true giants of the video game world. We cast an eye over their history in the arcade and console arenas. Take a look at the finest hours of the Dreamcast. And assess what the future might hold now they're no longer tied to one machine. But first, for those of you who haven't even heard of Sega before the Dreamcast, we find out where it all started. The late 70s saw the first boom in video games and arcade machines. While Atari was turning heads with Asteroids, Nintendo hooking players with Donkey Kong, and Namco raking in the coins with Pac-Man, Sega was soon making a name for itself with titles like Zaxxon and Flicky. The next big technological development involved movable graphics called sprites. Sega found all sorts of impressive tricks could be performed by throwing huge numbers of scaling sprites around the screen. It was then that the firm really started getting noticed. Hits such as Space Harrier, Afterburner, and the celebrated driving classic Outrun. Encouraged by the growing popularity of the console market in Japan, Sega released the Master System in 1985, a platform that rode on the popularity of their arcade hits. It delivered conversions of these. Well, as best it could manage, the living room hardware being a tad underpowered. But in those days, the key to success lay not only in having good-looking games, but on having the titles that everybody wanted. And it was Nintendo's rival, NES console, that had most of the big hitters. In the event, the Master System only gained a fraction of the popularity achieved by the all-conquering NES. In a bid to acquire a larger slice of the market, Sega launched the world's first 16-bit console, the Mega Drive. The Mega Drive had enough graphic firepower to grab the attention of those millions of Nintendo loyalists, providing, of course, they could ensure it was supported with a range of must-have games. The Mega Drive, like its predecessor, initially came to prominence on the back of some impressive arcade conversions. But it wasn't just Sega games that could be played on the Mega Drive. Industry stalwarts like Capcom and Taito also made games for the console, drawing on the talents of some of Japan's leading game creators. Ghouls and Ghosts was one such title, and turned more than a few heads, including that of broadcaster Jonathan Ross.
When we first got the Mega Drive, because we had the import one, and we had Ghouls and Ghosts on it, I think we started playing it Saturday morning, and then about 48 hours later we realised we'd only had a break for sort of pizzas and naps, and that was it. We just kept hitting continue. We only got about halfway through the game. That was a good game.
Okay, so the hardcore gamers loved them, but they still weren't a household name. What Sega needed was something that would give them their own distinctive identity, a character who put them firmly on the map. This little fella did wonders for them, a proper mascot at last, and one that at the time was considerably more fashionable than a squat Italian plumber. Sega was becoming a cool brand to be associated with. And it wasn't just for children. In America, young men were beginning to take notice, particularly when they were offered video games of all their favourite sports.
Hi everyone, welcome to Gunman.
These came courtesy of Electronic Arts, who were serving up impressive simulations of ice hockey and American football. And Electronic Arts successfully capitalised on another of the United States' passions, the wondrous act of tooling up and kicking some foreign butt. Taste simply wasn't important when you had the MTV generation in full swing, and indeed it was exactly this sort of thing that was keeping Sega's machine in the top spot. Despite their success, Sega proved they were still fallible when an add-on technology for delivering games via CD failed to take off. It was back in the R&D labs of their arcade divisions where a different sort of technical innovation was showing Sega the way forward. Sega have a good claim to be the pioneers of today's 3D gaming age, making even non-gamers sit up and take notice. Sega managed to bring the then jaw-droppingly realistic hand-to-hand combat of Virtua Fighter into the living room with their next console, the Saturn. It was now that people began to realise the investment in R&D that the company had made. The amazing animation was the result of the then unknown technique of motion capture. Sega had understood that games like this required a whole different kind of approach, not to mention specialist skills and staff. The problem was, so had the competition. So Sony managed to launch their PlayStation a couple of weeks after the Saturn, and with it, titles that delivered just that little bit more graphical punch. The main force behind these games was Sega's old arcade rival, Namco. At first, the odds looked even. Original titles developed for the Saturn were numerous, including this, the Panzer Dragoon series. Certain third parties also came through with the goods, the original Tomb Raider appearing on the machine to a warm reception. So warm, in fact, that Sony paid a fortune to secure exclusive rights to its sequels. Crucially, while Sega concentrated its marketing on existing gamers, Sony adopted a radical lifestyle approach and succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. The Saturn showed form with some vastly improved arcade ports that truly outclassed their rivals' titles, but by that time it was too late. Sony owned the world, and there seemed almost a kind of apathy towards Sega. In a cruel blow to a company that prided itself on making games that were easy to pick up, the Saturn became associated with hardcore players only. Sega had lost the console war with the Saturn, but no one could seriously question their ability to make remarkable games. It was time to remind the world of their excellence, with a machine that could do justice not just to their recent work, but also offer players something new. From this came the Dreamcast. It was a machine that offered not just the finest graphical firepower on the market, but also some bold additions to the standard console, such as joypads with built-in screens and, perhaps most importantly, connectivity to the internet. The most exciting thing about the Dreamcast was that it offered the promise of multiplayer gaming. In the event, it was a promise that took a very long time to keep. The Dreamcast online capability was a home entertainment first. Never before had a console featured a modem as standard. This bold move provided owners with standard internet access, and in theory gamers would also be able to play against each other over the net. Oh, what potential! Sega's legendary fast action games could be played against any cocky so-and-so, whether he be next door or hundreds of miles away. Arcade conversion Sega Rally 2 was just such a title ideally suited to this concept. When launching in Japan with the Dreamcast, it was indeed playable over the internet. The major letdown being, when the title made it to US and European gamers, this feature simply wasn't available. Their home market was living in the fast lane. The rest of us world was going to have to take things at a somewhat more sedate pace. Quite frankly, we were in for a bit of a wait. Finally, after overcoming some formidable technical hurdles, the first online game was ready. But it wasn't quite the graphical extravaganza you might have expected. Okay, the Dreamcast wasn't exactly breaking a sweat with Choo Choo Rocket, but the gameplay itself was irresistibly addictive. Yet, as enduringly playable as it might have been, both on and offline, it wasn't to everyone's taste. More than a few people had bought their Dreamcast with the hope of indulging in the sort of deathmatch sessions enjoyed by the PC crowd. Well, over a year later, they got their wish. The chance to sample the world's definitive first-person shooter, Quake 3 Arena. Things were beginning to come together. Sega's well-received US sports games were receiving online updates. Now, East Coast frat houses could take on West Coast frat houses in one huge Pan-American lecture skive. The next stage in Sega's plan was to go global with a title that allowed everyone to join in, irrespective of continent. Phantasy Star Online was an epic adventure game that hinged around cooperative play. It actually permitted players, be they American, European or Japanese, to connect to each other's servers. The servers even offered an in-game discussion during play. It was precisely what those desiring the international multiplayer experience had been craving. Yep, to coin a phrase, it really did take ages, but Sega got there in the end, and to this day the Dreamcast is the only console that offers true online gaming. That's it for the first part of this Sega special. Join us for part 2 as we look back at the Dreamcast's finest gaming hours. We check out the story behind its most ambitious game and consider what the future holds for them as a publisher.